Hearing no other additions to the agenda, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Art, seconded by Sheila. Sorry.
Don't call me Shirley.
That's an old joke. Okay, is there a second? And a second, all right. All those in favor of the approval of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes from the previous month. Are there any additions to the minutes? They're very good as usual. If not, someone make a motion to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll say.
Janine and Art, any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there any public to be heard today? Saying none?
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
All right. Is he out in the hall?
Harold?
Yep.
No, he went to the senior center. He should be here in like
Oh,
3
okay.
minutes.
All right.
And
Well, maybe
could
we
we move him first?
Yeah, as soon as he comes, we'll move him to the top of the agenda. Otherwise, let's just move to old business. We can stop as soon as they get here. So,
Thank you.
Library, Recreation, and Culture Tax Initiative.
So do you want to talk about what council's direction was last week?
Well, the council has given tentative approval to having 3 ballot questions. One is for the Center for Arts and Entertainment, one is for the branch library, and one is for a collection of rec center but not park upgrades. That I think it probably needs more definition, but I believe that the intent was that they bundle the proposal from the YMCA, which I would be happy to talk about, with the expansion of the old rec center and building the new rec center at Dry Creek Park. But the last was a little bit fuzzy. I mean, I only mentioned, I wanted to make sure that the Y proposal was on the ballot, but several other council members talked about it as a bundle, and I believe that's the intent of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's probably the way it will come back to us, but of course, until the council approves absolute ballot language, which would be, I'm understanding, in June, it will not be set in stone.
Okay, that is a change, isn't it? From what you're-
Change from what?
Well, weren't you going to unbundle them before?
Well,
They'll still be separate.
there was never the intention of, the survey had several possible bundles, but that was just the survey. When we, saw the reactions and nothing had really overwhelming, it's gonna pass no matter what happens, support. The idea was to make each thing that was on the ballot at all a separate question. And so it looks like 3 questions is some kind of an ideal choice. And those 3, which would be library, arts, and rec, are the target. And it's still a little undefined what the rec one is going to be. They held a public outreach last week.
Yeah.
And I have not heard any report from that. I guess, did Prab run that, Jeff?
No, it was staff and the consultant.
Okay,
And right before I arrived, I got feedback from the consultant, so I haven't even had a chance to review it yet.
okay, so,
Marcia, I have a concern, if I could just ask, because I think these are really important. But I got my new tax assessment yesterday, and it took my breath away. And I have concern if too much gets bundled in one area, that when people see what Boulder County taxes are gonna be, if that's going to affect how they vote for these very important things. So I hope one of the considerations will be to, whatever we need and want, that we take that into consideration, because, you know, if I'm sitting there thinking, well, how am I gonna do this? Adding even more tax is, you know, I worry about our citizens.
I agree with you, that's actually why I wanted the Y proposal to be unbundled with the other things,
Right.
but I only have one vote. So, yeah, I don't know, and here's Harold, do we wanna finish this discussion, or do we wanna just put it on hold and let Harold talk about whatever he's gonna talk about?
Well, I think it'd be good for him to hear what we're talking about.
Okay.
And, you know, I agree with what was said, as you have, with all these other, but did I hear you say there's gonna be a fourth thing with the YMCA, or is that gonna be under the recreation?
Well, that is not decided, but I think the three council members gave the opinion that all the rec, which would include the Y, should be bundled as one question. I expressed the opinion that the Y should be separate, but, you know, that's not decided. I think the council's goal is that they, that there be three questions, you know, again, one library, one culture, and one sports, but, it's
not clear yet.
not decided yet.
And it has to be decided, what, by the end of July? Or-
Yeah, and, you know, the word is that it should come back sometime in June.
June, okay.
No, we're shooting for June. I think the challenge with the Y project is,
Harold, would you mind, they don't know what that even means. Could you do a quick summary of what the Y project is? Yeah, did everybody see that?
and so,
Yeah.
so basically, you know, it's, what was unique about this, and it hit us in the last minute, is that it is a multi-dimensional project in that it includes 100 affordable housing units, expanded childcare, a pool, 25-meter pool, ice rink, and one court, and then obviously the other amenities that they provide at the Y. And so when we look at what the council established in terms of goals, it basically starts checking every box that they have in their goal setting session. The way they finance these projects is they utilize housing tax credits to help offset some of the capital cost that's associated with the facility. So at the end of the day, you know, when we look at Centennial, I think we plugged in $8 million to renovate Centennial, but that's basically converting it to court space. We think
Which everyone hates.
which everyone didn't like, we think to probably rehab Centennial to keep it a pool. On the low end, we think that's gonna be 15 to 17 million. I honestly think, based on what we're seeing other projects coming at, that's gonna be probably around 25 million based on what we're seeing in inflation. So this really presented a unique opportunity to say for 10 to 12 million, you get pool, you get ice rink, you get expanded childcare and housing, which financially makes a lot of sense. The thing about it in the bundling or unbundling is there is a nexus into some of the other projects, and how we model the pro forma will be dependent on the choice we make. So right now we have, how much money do we have for the operations of Centennial, Jeff?
It's about 1.1 million.
So if the Y package is on the ballot and it passes, and the other recreation items pass. If you connect them, then it's easier for us to then program in the pro forma that we're gonna shift the 1.1 million from Centennial to the other recreation center, which actually reduces the the ongoing operating tax increase associated with it. If they're unbundled, it makes that harder to do because if this, then this becomes a challenge. Because if one passes and the other doesn't, then it blows up your financial model. So those are all things that we're trying to work through to figure out. So yeah, I don't know if I answered all the questions.
Yeah. It would be built where Centennial Pool is located. The pool would be removed. Once the new Y would be built, they would donate, or in an exchange for the land we gave them for their new site, they would give their current location to the city of Longmont, which would have the potential for another location for affordable or attainable housing.
Yeah, and that's where the modeling starts coming in, and I started, and so this is not firm numbers, but the value of the land exchange to convert to an attainable for sale product, I think has a value of about, let's just say, at least $6 million. So when you look at a $10 to $12 million contribution and you get $6 million of land for attainable for sale housing, the economics start looking really good on this, because as we're working the attainable housing side, we took some fee waiver options to the council, which they directed us to move forward on, which we're getting pretty clear-eyed in that we think between that and some kind of land offset, you can finance attainable housing for sale. And so now, not only are you hitting affordable housing, you're hitting attainable housing, you're hitting childcare in the area adjacent to this, which we know we need in both affordable and attainable housing. And these amenities, I think the key for us is figuring out how the memberships work and how we cross them. Because what we don't want to do is invest in this and then you have to have a Y membership and a city membership. And so we have to build that cross membership component to this, which is work that we have to move through.
Marcia?
Now I had a question and I can't remember what it was. When the tax begins, in this land swap deal, would the property tax and sales tax increases on the ballot begin in the first of 2024 so that we build up a fund, or would they start later when the Y breaks ground?
Still working through that. My gut says we would approach it in a similar fashion to the arts and entertainment, one of our arts and entertainment location, because typically when you're relying on tax credits with CHAFA, it's not uncommon to take 2 cycles to go through it. And so I think it would make more sense to start it once you actually have all the tax credits in place, because you don't want to necessarily collect taxes that you're not going to be using and that are restricted. So, but we're still, that's on the list.
Right, and that was a second update. The Alliance for the Center for Arts and Entertainment have now agreed that regardless of when they raise the money, if a miracle happened and they raised the money really early, they would still not have the tax start until the first of the year in 2027. So people get some breathing space. Put it off, give this change in the tax ratios. And so what Harold's talking about is that this would be also listed as some sort of a deferral of the tax.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, when they send out when they did the surveys, did they do them in Spanish as well? Did they call it Spanish speaking?
Yes.
And what were do you have think of right offhand what those responses were?
No, I don't, but I can get that, and I'll send that out to everybody, the results of it.
My gut tells me it was like 17 to 20%, so, because I remember noticing there was a difference when we look at a population.
17 to 20% of them said yes?
Or responded, I don't
Oh, okay.
know, but, I mean, but I did know that when we look at the demographics of our community, I think we're closer to 30%. I noticed that there was a fairly significant difference. But yeah, she's looking at that now, and it may be a little bit lower.
Janine, would you mind restating what you said about your taxes? It might be good for Harold to take.
That they took my breath away.
Yeah.
Property tax.
The assessment on my house is just unbelievable. And I know that not just as an older adult on a fixed income, which a good portion of our population is, that certainly is going to affect people's ability and willingness to pass anything that has tax associated with it. And these are very, very important projects. And my concern is if you bundle too much, if you put too much in front of people to vote on after receiving this kind of shock this year, that you better have big red words that say this isn't going into effect until 2027, because their response, I'm quite sure, is going to be no, just no. And, you know, from that survey, I already think, I'm not sure what people are going to say. So.
Christina, did you want to say something?
No, we were just trying to figure out how to keep these names.
Oh.
We could
Move
down
the
a
table.
little bit. We have to, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Jeanette. I got my notice yesterday also. And I
Afraid I
opened it
did-
up
I
and I
didn't
said,
open
holy
mine.
crap, and that's,
Sorry.
but that's not exactly what I said.
It's
It's 100, it was 120,000.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing.
Takes your breath away, like you said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, I think when I walked in from council last night, my wife had it laying out on the counter for me to see. And I had the same thing. You know, I think unfortunately, I mean, obviously we're all waiting to see what the state legislature is going to do.
right.
I think, you know, when I was looking at mine, it made sense. Because when my wife's into watching what houses are on sale and everything else, and the reality is, for every reason that we're talking about affordable for sale products and affordable rental and attainable products and attainable rental is because my appraisal matched the market in my area of the community. So from a market perspective, the number's right. And I think the challenge, I mean, so the good news is, at some point, we're all probably gonna make a lot of money off of our house if the economy stays stable.
We're dead.
But you
Yeah,
know why?
But,
You can't afford to move.
Right.
You can't afford to downsize. And that's what older adults are looking at.
Mhm.
We can't afford to downsize because we're gonna pay at least the same amount for half of the square footage. So, and the interest rates are high. So it's a very complex thing here.
yeah,
You know, I hope the legislature will give us a break.
I think they will. I
You
think
know?
everything we're hearing, but I think that's why things like the Y project make a lot of sense, because if you can drop in, and I think it's gonna change. So when we look structurally, what we have to do, we have to go into more modern urban style development, pre-war construction, long narrow lots, you know, small setbacks. We know we can hit those price points. It's getting the land to do it. And I think that's where all of this, as we talk about it, and depending on what council chooses to put on the ballot, I think it's working through all of these issues in a really strong communication plan. But at the end of the day, it's also incumbent upon the people that are supporting these initiatives to develop their own communication plans as well, because once they drop it on the ballot, we're done. We can't engage in a conversation other than factual information. So yeah, it'll be interesting. And unfortunately, I don't think there's an end in sight in terms of pricing. I've heard the state demographer. We're going to try to bring her in to talk to the council. I think we're still behind on housing, which we don't agree with how the governor and the legislature is drafting a bill to deal with this issue. We don't agree with the how, but the why, I think we all agree with, is why we need to do it. And if we don't, I just think it's going to change the characteristics of, it's already changed the characteristics of the state, and it's just going to get worse.
Be interesting now that we received this in the mail, if they do a survey today, how much change there would be interesting, but we're not gonna do that.
Well, my worry is the timing. It's a terrible time to put a tax on a ballot when people just got that wonderful news.
Well, next year, the challenge too is next year, we know the school district's gonna probably go with the bond initiative, so next year doesn't work. And then you're back into another reappraisal cycle in the year after that. And so, yeah, the timing's just not optimal anyway.
Do you think anything's gonna happen at the legislature?
Yeah. I think it will. We talked to the council last night in their first budget conversation. We're estimating that it's probably gonna reduce it by 50%.
Reduce what, I think,
The value that you pay. So they're going to reduce the, what they're talking about is potentially reducing via the residential commercial ratio by $40,000, which, and again, we only are getting bits and pieces of information, but when we model it, it looks like about a 50% reduction in the increase in the cost of taxes. So now what they end up with is anybody's guess, but I think they're going to do something.
Well, that wasn't on the agenda, but it was a good discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it was all in under the heading of the ballot discussion, which
Yeah.
was on the
Right.
agenda,
Yes.
so.
it was on that.
Was there anything further on that before we move on?
Nope.
Okay. I guess we're going to move on to, directly to Harold. Thank you for coming, by the way.
No worries.
And can you come next week or next month?
If you can get it on my calendar, I'll see what I can do.
I don't know who got you here, but I appreciate it,
These three and Erica got me here, so.
Let's see, I had a presentation that I was going to make, and you had the sheet in front of you that kind of outlined some of the high points. And I started thinking about it, and you can see that I added some stuff here all over the place. It's a complicated business, the senior housing. And, actually, I think I should introduce everybody first. I don't know if you know everybody, probably not. I'm Dave Grutta. I'm the chair. This is Brandy Queen. She's the counseling supervisor, resource coordinator, and overall big shot, I guess, at Senior Center.
Art Quintana.
Art Quintanas and Ruth Ellis, and Sheila, and Jeanette, Taryn, and Marcia Martin.
He knows.
Yeah, I know.
You know those guys. So,
Doesn't often admit
I think I'll just take a moment here right now to mention again that we've had 2 resignations. And so that brings the total number of vacancies we have right now to 4. And so we're all gonna have to do some work. I think we can't depend only on the city to find people for us. I think we're gonna have to all try to find good board members. And, yes.
Yeah. But remember, we're out of the cycle now,
I
so.
understand, but you
Yes.
can make summer appointments, can you not?
No.
I was a summer appointment.
Well, we have two candidates that we'll talk about interviewing later.
Okay,
Still leaves you two vacancies that will be filled at the end of the year. So
Okay.
there's a period of time we're going to be short.
why did I start in August then?
Well, again,
Did it change?
Part of this appointment
Part-
cycle now.
yeah, so the two people that apply now will get appointed for July or August, which
Okay.
is like what you did.
Okay,
But we still have those other two vacancies that won't be filled till the end of the year.
okay, I still say we need to do some work between now and when we make
Yes.
our appointments next. Because, people don't seem to wanna join these boards very much.
Yeah, Harold, I don't know if they asked you about this or not, but 3 boards that I know of asked for an extension in the amount of, to accept applications, and the city clerk's office decided not to do that. And then this board got 2 resignations, so,
So I think what we were looking at is seeing what came in. And these relate, resignations in the system. Let me see, I have that email somewhere.
well, the boards, none of them, the quorum, was, I guess, what the city clerk's office used as the criterion. All of the boards wanted to have a choice. Only one of them was going to be actually down a seat before this happened.
Right.
And yeah, two more were gonna be down a seat because, there were 6 months 6 months left on a term, which is not so bad. But, it only got worse.
Also, Harold, do you know if the quorum number changes? So this board has 9 members. We're gonna be short 2. Does the quorum change from 5 to 4? Or is that a legal question?
I think it's based on, does it change from 5 to 4?
So 9 quorum would be 5 if we only have 7 members.
That's a Eugene question.
Okay.
You do what?
It's a.
If we need to talk with legal about that.
Oh, okay.
It depends on what the bylaws state and how it's written, and
Okay.
so it could be written where it's actually appointed members, which then it would reduce.
The ordinance says membership of the membership, quorum of the membership,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Well, that's the question, is membership who's actually appointed, or does it include
Right.
a vacancy? So, yeah, that's a Eugene.
Well, let me get started. Everybody's gonna have an opportunity to speak their piece, hopefully. I'm just gonna start by saying when I started on the board, which will be 2 years ago in summer, I was just overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that's done at the senior center. And the more I learn about the senior center, the more I realize there's just all kinds of things that are going on all the time. Just to give you an idea, and I hope you haven't heard a lot of this, maybe you've heard some of this, but last year, we had roughly 1,400 people receive assistance as far as housing, financial, caregiving, and health and medical care. And we had over 2,600 people in classes, that's in the tech center. And that comes out to about 184 sessions over a period of a year. And I don't know how many people you got involved in. I know there's Elmer, but I think there's more than that.
Oh, they're the Senior Center Tech Center?
Yes,
Senior Center Tech Connect?
Yeah.
They have, I think, 35 active volunteers, but a total of like 60 volunteers strong.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people involved, and there's a lot of people that are served through the center. As far as counseling and support is concerned, there were 70 intake interviews, almost 400 individual counseling interviews, and over 300 support group interviews. And so that's all fantastic, and I think you only had yourself for most of the year, as far as the counseling. far as the counseling is concerned. We do have another person now. I don't know if anybody's ever been a counselor. I was a counselor for a few years, and I know how hard that is, that kind of a case, it's tough. We had 9,000 registrants through 610 programs. That's the online registration system. So you just look at the numbers of the volume of people that go through the senior center. It's really surprising. But by the same token, in my opinion, I think almost everybody in the board would agree, they're stressed. A lot of people, they are just really stressed, and they work hard, and I can tell that they are stressed because they got red eyes, and they look tired sometimes. Anyway, so that's kind of just some of the services, and not to mention the 4,000 Meals on Wheels that take place at the senior center. Now, you're not responsible for that, provide the space for the Meals on Wheels. So it's a pretty good size operation. I thought I should state the mission statement, and this is from 2007. And I don't know if that's the last time that went to the council, your mission statement, strategic plan.
Almost
Anyway.
certainly it's the last time.
It was certainly the last time.
I said almost certainly. I wasn't there for all of that.
Oh, okay, I wasn't either. But anyway, the mission statement is to build and foster opportunities which promote dignity, independence, enjoyment, community, and a sense of purpose. And all of that, I think, is still, that's still valid. A lot's changed in the last, if you look at the top bullet point there, the population has increased some 13,000 people, I think it is. And that's 17% roughly. I'm sure you're aware of those demographic kind of changes, but it impacts the services that we provide at the senior center. A third of these people, a third of our population is over 55 and older. So the new people, the 15,000 people that we've increased, the city has increased from 2010 to 23. That's about almost 5,000 people just for Hispanics. I should say for over 55. So everything, that in itself, seems to me, is a way too big workload for the seniors, just the increase. If you look at the breakout of the population, we've got, I just said 33% are 55, or that's 33,000 people. I mean, if you look at it that way, that's a huge number of people to try to serve. And then we go down to the 19% or almost 20% are 65 or older. And so we've got a sizable population. And I don't know how long your services have been oriented towards 55 and older. Has it always been that way?
I think so.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's a third of the population. The Latino population, that's a big focus of this whole discussion here, and that's probably the main reason we're here today. The Latino population, all of my estimates are from the Census Bureau 2010 or 2020 or the American Community Survey, probably familiar with both of those. The Latino population is roughly 24%, 25%. That's a quarter of the population, that's 25,000 people. And if you look at the number of people that they serve, we don't have real good numbers as far as the Latinos, and there's reasons for that, and some of it's privacy, confidentiality, that sort of thing. And we may change some of that, but we're looking at that. But 25,000 people. I thought I would mention that the poverty rate is almost 12% among Latinos, and compared to the overall poverty rate. Now, if you back up the poverty rate, the Hispanic poverty rate, and just consider whites, the way I figure it would be about 6-7% poverty rate. So the poverty rate of Hispanics, Latinos, is almost double of what you can find in the majority white community. And I think it's a little misleading just to say it's 8%. Now, my personal favorite is that seniors over 80 are expected to increase 244% by 2050. And that came from the area agency on aging. And what do I say, other than people my age and some of us in this group are going to be, there's going to be more of us looking for services, probably in better health, they're living longer, those kinds of things. So we anticipate from the envisioned Longmont, and again, you're probably very familiar with that, 24,000 new residents by 2035. Personally, I think that's a little high, because if we've had a 15,000 increase from 2010, that's 12, 13 years, and another 12, 13 years seems to be around another 15,000 people. So it might be a little high, but still, it's still significant, any way you slice it. And last year, I guess I gotta clarify this a little bit. We had 761 patrons utilizing our front door.
It's visits to the building.
Okay, that's just people walking in the door.
So maybe I come 5 days a week.
Okay,
So I'm
so it
counting
could
5
be
times
this,
there.
it could be the same person 26,000 times. Yeah, that sort of thing, okay. But still, that's a lot of people walking through the door. Most of those people go to the front desk. Good portion of them. I'm guessing that they do. I guess my point is, you got a clerical staff, 2 people. And you got 66,000 people walking through the door. And a good portion of those are going to go to the front desk. So they have to deal with those folks, not only just to give them directions, but they have additional duties on top of that. Most of them, I don't know exactly everything they do, but I think of the people that are overworked in that building, I think would be my guess.
Who were the 2, did you say? I'm sorry.
The desks.
Front desk.
Front
Got
desk.
to the front desk, or whatever you call it, the reception center.
And they do a huge part of the registration.
I'm sorry?
And they do a lot of the registration
Yeah,
for programs.
I know, right, they have other things they do, and that's a major chunk. I said before that there's what, 9,000 registrations and 600 programs, something like that.
So there's 2 office assistants and an administrative assistant, right? So
Administrative assistant and
2 office assistants, so there's 3 people, right?
is one a volunteer, or one is a
So
part-time?
two full-time and 1 part-time.
1 part.
And in 2023, it looks like we're on track as we were last year. In terms of the programs offered, again, this is focusing on Hispanics, our needs here, and Ronnie got this, and he said they're talking about the programs available, and he said they offered 81 programs and 21 drop-in groups. 1 program was in Spanish. That was in 2010.
Or 2001.
I'm sorry?
2001.
Battle?
2001, I'm sorry. Yep. I shorted you there.
The last time we hired a programming staff person was 2001.
Wow. Yeah. Then in the spring quarter of 2023, just recently, you had 187 programs, 48 drop-ins, still no programming staff, bilingual programming staff, as you said. But there were 10 programs in Spanish. Any way you slice it, it's not anywhere near filling the need that's out in the community when you look at the total number of Hispanics out there. All right, under staffing, basically most of the increase, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the increase has been in counseling and the resource staff over the last several years. And that's good, we need that. We need to attend to their social, physical, emotional, basic needs. And again, we have no bilingual programming staff, and that's a major equity problem. And all of this, and I don't, sometimes you add up the number of FTEs and you get maybe a little bit different results depending on the point in time. But it's basically been 10 people. It started with 7 people up until I think it was 2012 or 13, and you got a position, 9, 10, anyway.
Yeah.
So you got all these people, you got all these services that have grown, with 7 to 10 people, for Christ's sake. You know, that's what I feel strongly, that we need some more staff there. Even if the staff wasn't overworked, you still have a whole population out there that's not being served. So, given all that, the punchline is we need a Spanish-speaking program coordinator, which would also be involved in outreach. I think we all agree we've got a problem with outreach. Part of it is the programming. Part of it is just having the time to do the kinds of things you need to do to outreach. And it's not just Hispanics, it's other folks. You know, there are blacks, there's Indians, there's others in the community. And another full-time office support. I hope I made the case for the office support. And we've talked about often the need for weekends and evenings. And we had a discussion about that, Jeff and Ryan and I, and we were thinking, and this is not unusual, use some part-timers. I call them limited term employees. I don't know if that's what they're around here, but anyway, unbenefited employees, which are about 30% cheaper than a regular employee. So you could get by offering some additional services. I don't know how you'd arrange the staff, you know, whether you put those people by themselves on the weekend or how you'd rearrange the staff. But that would be a cheaper way of offering services on weekends and evenings. One other thing that I didn't mention, that if we can get some additional staff, some of the other things that are being absorbed by other staff right now, and a big one is like Brandy, for example, some of the other staff take away from their duties to do some of the work we've been talking about. But one area is international travel. And international, there's different views on international travel, but we know it's popular. A lot of people ask for it. And I've been on a couple myself, and they're wonderful, they really are. But anyway, that would free up a person that handles that right now. I think it's primarily Shar that handles most of that. She'd be doing more of that. And so we'd be able to offer more travel experiences to a certain segment of the population out there. So I guess that's about what I had to say. The bottom line is, got a lot of people, you don't have enough staff, a lot of people aren't being served, and in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most of the people on this board, the Hispanic community is underrepresented across the board. And that's why we need that Spanish-speaking program coordinator. There's more, and to my way of thinking, we could double the staff, triple the staff. Because there's enough of them that won't fly this year. You know, we could increase the staff and use that kind of staff with the kind of population that we've got. Well, I know we're not going to get that. But maybe, you know, as we go through this in the months and years to come, I think we need to build on what we're doing here. Because if our outreach and our program coordinators are successful, what's that going to do? All that's going to do is bring more people in, increase the demand on the staff. I mean, you know, that's a good thing, but that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, I have one question, kind of unrelated, and that is, do you do mid-year budget adjustments?
We're adjusting budgets monthly.
Oh, you do monthly?
Yeah, and carryovers and what we're looking at, so we're constantly watching it.
So, how does that work? Does it come from the department or?
Right, so when Ron started, what we did was we took a look at the unspent budget, senior services budget, and it really started with Brandy. We took a look at the unspent budget and brought forth some items to Harold to say this was unspent in 2022. And we would like to make the argument for these reasons to be able to bring that money as carryover in 2023 to be able to spend that. And some of those reasons, were the reasons that you listed. That goes before Harold, to be approved in July.
Yeah, and part of it is though, you can't use it for ongoing
Right,
expenses.
it has to be one time.
Because that then would commit funding.
You should have taken care of that in the budget.
Well, right, we put it in the budget, but then that's really one time, very specific reasoning is why we're doing it. And then if it's not associated with what the budget is, then we start asking a lot of questions, of which they just got pounded on last week, so.
Five questions back and forth.
So, if I can kind of give some background, I think, and I've had to explain this to the council, when you look at where we were from 2010 to today, there's a fair amount of there's a lot of things that are in play. And I'm not gonna go, but I'm gonna anchor in on 2008, the Great Recession. And that was a significant piece of the puzzle in how cities handle it in a different way. So, and I'm actually continuing to learn a lot of things about different nuances and how it was handled. But in 08, when the recession hit, some staff made some recommendations in terms of cutting services, cutting staff as part of the operating budget to deal with the deficit. I think one council accepted it, they had an election, another council came in, they didn't accept it, they changed it, and what they ended up doing was keeping a lot of those positions in place, but utilizing one-time funding, not ongoing funding. And so what that did was actually create what we thought when I got here in 2012 was a $3 million budget reset. It actually functionally turned into a $4 million budget reset. In addition to that, instead of tactically looking at positions in the organization in terms of making tactical cuts based on priorities, what they said was, is if there's a position where people aren't sitting in it, we're just gonna cut that position. And so that created a train wreck. Because when you look at the fact that you have $3 to $4 million in ongoing funding that you have to recover, starting in 2012, you can't add anything new in those budget cycles because you're just basically creating the ongoing funding into positions that were being funded on an annual basis by one-time funding. So we lost a lot of ground in that recovery mode. We also lost a lot of ground in that positions that were vacant that were cut, just because they were vacant, had different spaces in terms of the critical nature and the critical impact of the organization. So now you're having to make up $3-4 million on what you already know that you kept, and you're having to figure out how to fund the positions that were cut because they were vacant. And that's what we took 6 years to work on in order to straighten out that budget, because that's not good financial practices. In the middle of that, the property tax returns and the sales tax returns weren't bouncing back as fast, so you had really narrow budgets. And so even when I got here, as we were making those adjustments, one of the things that we were dealing with, I think there were a couple of years where for staff we had to give bonuses only, the salary increases were narrow, and what we were trying to cover is what we call level 1 expenses, which are must-pay bills, and there was very little room for any additional capacity building in this. So that's a big hit. At the same time, we went through the flood, and we had to start shifting more one-time dollars into flood recovery for projects that we weren't anticipating, because now the greenway was destroyed and we had to leverage those dollars against the match that we had to do to receive the federal dollars. So that started reducing the one-time funds. And so when you start seeing the ads come in here, so from 2010, when you were at 7 to now, we've added, I think, 3.25 positions. It really started in 15, so you're starting to see that 15, 17 piece in here. And so it has been a strain to kind of move through this and deal with these other issues. It is not, I will tell you from my perspective in Jim's, it's not for the sake of not, but we want to do this, and we want to add these positions. Unfortunately, the story that you said today, based on everything I just talked about, is actually the experience that I'm seeing throughout the entire organization.
That's what I was gonna say, same story.
It's the same story all over the place, and so specifically why we added a resource specialist, and we added they're part of the therapeutic rec coordinator, because it's half with Jeff and half with Brandy. And why we added the clinician was because what we were hearing from Brandy and her group is that the wait list and people getting in to see counselors was about 2 to 2.5 months, if I remember what was told to me in budget. And so understanding all the other operational needs, we were like, these people are needing immediate life services, and we need to find a way to start incrementally adding those positions first, because that's really about, can you stay in your house? Do you have mental health treatment? And then we also added a position in Brandy's world that's tag team with the housing authority that is, I don't think that's on this list.
Because we don't pay for it, I think it's not on this list.
So there's actually another position that we added as funding through the housing authority that works as a collective in this. And so, but we've really been focused on that aspect, because for me, at the end of the day, and when we talk to council, you look at what are your core services, and in this case, our core services is providing the resources that people need when they're going through tough times to make sure we can support them. And it's highly likely I'm probably going to hear the same thing again this year, just because I know what the workload's like and what they're seeing coming in. It's exacerbated by the economy and everything else. And so I think that's going to continue to be the press. As we look at bilingual positions, I think we do need to probably look at the structure we have when we have openings and put a bilingual preference or something in
And
there.
that's what I was gonna say, as positions come open, that really is something that I do on a regular basis, and that I will ask Ronnie about. What is, let's look at this job description, and do we need to have it bilingual preferred? What is the forward-facing component to the community? And is it a bilingual preferred position? And I'm thinking, because of all of the reasons that you said here, if we get to the point where we have vacancies, or any new positions, Ronnie and I will have that discussion that we're gonna need to move to the point where we need those bilingual skills.
So you're thinking that if you have 12 positions, you have a vacancy, you decide you might fill it with a bilingual.
Bilingual preferred, yes, or bilingual required.
But you still wind up with 12 positions.
Correct. Well, I'm gonna get to more of this, because so when I say this exists all over the organization, it really does. And I think where people, part of what I talk to these folks about is explaining our budget. You will hear we have almost a $500 million budget. That's true. But the reality is that there are state statutes, municipal charter issues, code that really start regulating how and where we can use those funds. Of 400, I think it's 414 million, but when carryovers will exceed $500 million, only about 75 million of that is the general fund. And of that 75 million in the general fund, 75% of those expenses are related to personnel. So
I'm sorry, how much?
75% are related to personnel. So our general fund activities are really heavy on the personnel side. And when you start breaking it down, when we talk about what's in the general fund, police, fire, library, museum, recreation, senior services, neighborhood services, human service agencies, parts, facilities, finance, ETO. I mean, so of the 75 million, there are a large number of departments that are utilizing the tax supported funds, which when you get into the budget process and you start looking at what you're having in new revenue, there's been many years where the message has been to the folks, don't even submit a level 2 request, additional personnel, because we're not sure we have enough money to cover our must-pay bills and what's coming in, which is actually what led to the conversation of, I think it was last budget cycle, where we had the recreation board coming to us saying we need to build more projects, we need more recreation centers. We had the library board saying we need to do more for library services. We didn't hear from you all publicly, but I was hearing from you all via staff and what we needed to do. We're short on code enforcement officers. It was just blanketed. And so when we were talking about the new projects, I just said to council, we cannot do this unless we have a tax increase, because there's no way we can incrementally step into this. It's just never going to happen. So inherently what happens then in these conversations is we go into the budget and they put in their CFP, they put in their level 1, they put in their level 2. Typically level 1 requests, we're probably accounting for between $700,000 and $1 million in annual budgets, in terms of that was just natural inflation and prices going up. So if you think about it, that's not including salary increases, and it's not including health insurance increases, risk management increases, and all of that. So then we layer that on top of the level 1. And then what we're left with can be allocated in level 2 expenses, and then we start going through those priority-based needs and what we need to do.
Yeah, Harold, could you explain what's level 1 and what's level 2?
Level 1's like your utility bills at your house, or your grocery bill, or your cleaning supply bill. That's what level 1 for us is those things that we need to do to continue doing what we've been doing, and we don't have a choice unless we stop.
Continue operation.
We either stop it and reduce it, or we pay that expense. Level 2 is that added value component to what we're doing. And, as I've seen the growth in programs across the organization, and Jeff has probably heard me say this more than the others in the room, I think historically I would say, and I can't speak to what happened before me, I can only speak to now, where I'm really pressing them to go, if you don't have the capacity, why are you adding? Because we need to focus on what our core is. Because I think we have historically been relatively undisciplined in adding programs that we didn't necessarily have the capacity to do, and we were putting more on staff. And what would inherently happen is we'd come into budget and they'd say, well, we added this, we need to staff, and this is not your group. They're really good at, when Michelle was here and Brandy and working through it, they were really good at being very succinct with what they needed and what was critical, and that's when we were trying to fund the positions. But somebody would come to me and go, well, we added this program, now we need the staff. And I would go, so where was that in the budget conversation? And did you think about that when you added it? And oh, by the way, I've got 10 more priorities that are more significant than this. And so we've been working recently. Well, we lost a lot of progress in the flood, because we really lost a good 4 years in some of our budgetary progress, just because we had to be so focused on it. But we re-engaged, and these are the conversations that they have with me every year when we're going through it, to say, well, I know you added it, but I need to find a counseling position. You've got to figure it out. And so that's another part of the problem. And then the other day, as we were getting ready for this budget, I had a number of people tell me something that I think I intuitively knew but didn't fully grasp it, is we are just now at the level of staffing as an organization where we were pre-2008.
Wow.
And that's organizationally. And I think I can say unequivocally it was because we cut the wrong positions and because we funded with ongoing services. I can tell you what I did in the previous community and what most of our adjoining communities did is they made the cuts that were necessary during that economic crisis so that then when the new revenue starts coming in, instead of just refilling what you have, they were really tactical in how they filled and how they expanded. And so they were dealing with some of those staffing issues. COVID didn't help matters either. We weathered it better than most, but we had to really retract inward and not do a lot of ads during the COVID period because we just didn't know how the economy was going to respond. We got out of it pretty unscathed, but we were bringing some of those concepts in of we didn't kill positions, we froze positions. You know, if we had to eliminate, we eliminated. We, even before that, tactically eliminated some positions on economic development so we could reduce ongoing expenses and push it over to LEDP. So I think we're now at a baseline where we can do this. Last year was probably the biggest budget that I've ever had here, and we added a fair number of positions. You know, we're really getting pressed in our engineering world and our development world, and that's incredibly important because that's what's going to facilitate the production of housing, which hopefully can add more affordable and attainable units as we're doing it. You know, their lag time, they were getting 3 or 4 months behind. So we've got to do all of that. And now let's layer on top of this the issue that we're having with hiring, and that's another problem.
Getting people.
Just getting people. We had a large amount of carryover this year, and it was because of vacancies. And, you know, when you listening to the state demographer and other economic economists present, you know, nationally, for every 2 jobs that are on the market, there's 1 applicant to fill that job. And the amount of competition for positions has increased dramatically. And you're seeing it where it's really bad in certain areas, not as bad in other areas.
Especially in the human services area, the Children and Families Division has had a clinician position open for 6 weeks. And so the city pays a much higher rate than local nonprofits, than mental health partners, and they have had a hard time filling that position. And so similar to the positions that are listed here, other areas of human services are having a difficult time.
Well, that's a market issue. So like it's different in every area. Mm-hmm. So engineers, we had to adjust mid-year to your point of view, mid-year adjustments. Mm-hmm. We tactically watch, and so we have a process that we go through in terms of how long is the position open, how many people have we lost, and if we start hitting certain triggers, we dive in and look at what's going on. We had to adjust engineers because it wasn't that there wasn't people in the market, it's the market was outrunning everyone. And so we had to, I think, adjust our step 1 engineer by $15,000 a year, our senior engineer by 20. And even then, it helped, but we were still getting outpaced, especially by the private sector. What's happening in the social service world, I think, is the combination of there are more jobs than there are applicants. But I also think it's something similar, I'm pretty confident. You're not seeing the number of people going into social services that used to go into it. So I think what's exacerbating that issue is you just don't have the volume of people moving into the system.
That's an issue statewide.
Nationally. I mean,
Kids in high school are pushed into STEM.
Right. So I'm a history major. I'm a history major with a master's in public administration going, I think we need to focus more on the social sciences because when you look at the world of the future, that's what we're going to need. But we keep wanting to push people into STEM, and what you're going to find is a glut of people in STEM and not enough in social services, and then it's going to pay more. But I think the other thing that I've talked to the council about is, I think generally in government, we're seeing huge challenges in terms of people wanting to work for government. And so the example I will use is the world is today is much different than it was 20 years ago when I started in this profession. I honestly say to these folks, if I look back to 1995 when I decided to go to get an MBA versus go to law school or an MBA, if I were in that position today, I would not choose an MBA. And so what we're seeing holistically in government is people are exiting as fast as you can imagine. I get 4 contacts by headhunters a week. I have peers, mentors that are just ejecting out of the system, and it's really because of the vitriol that started to percolate into local government. Local government has historically been immune to that, but what we're seeing at the national level and now at the state level has now started to percolate into the local level. And then the things that these folks deal with on a daily basis, people hear about it, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. And so in many cases, we create positions, but we can't fill them. And so it is as complicated as I've ever seen this world. Now you also have the change in what the new generations are wanting coming into the workforce, and we're doing a lot of things to try to combat it. So we fully embraced workplace flexibility, work from home components. They really can't. What they do, it's hard for them to do that. Last year for salary increases, what took up a significant chunk of the new dollars coming in is the minimum salary increase for staff was 6%, and we capped it at 12. We're in a comp study, we're looking at it. It wouldn't surprise me to see the same thing coming in again, because you don't want to forget the folks you have here, because if you take money to add a position, but you lose 2 because there's other positions, then you just dug a deeper hole. So yeah, I mean, that is literally a 10 to 15 minute overview of what we spent an hour on last night, and we will probably spend with council another 40 hours on.
The whole stinking rest of the summer.
And what we will spend hundreds of hours on dealing with. So the one thing I wanted to let you know is A, they have been communicating the needs. B, we've tried to address them where we can tactically, but we're trying to balance it within all the needs of the entire general fund. And I will say, I think one of the needs that's creeping up this year actually is showing itself out of children, youth, and family services. And that is a big product of what we're seeing happen within our community with our children, our teenagers, and our young adults. And fortunately, we've seen some of that show itself in really bad ways recently at Centennial Park and at Hobby Lobby in terms of some activity and that we can say is gang related. And it's a different problem than what we experienced as a community 20 years ago. What I'm saying to folks is how we dealt with it 20 years ago, it will not work today. And so I know that we're going to have to look at something on the gang intervention side and in the prevention side, but it's also showing itself in parental education in the sense of how do we bring some resources there. So, and when that's all said and done, as we look at the budget for this year, and Jim did a good job. If you have a chance, watch the video that where he presented to council. Right now, on the sales tax perspective, sales tax is about 1% over where we were last year. Use tax is way down, which when you look at sales and use tax, then we're not performing at where we hope to be from a budget perspective. Now, the good news is we didn't budget for Costco. The bad news is it's only 8 months, and at best it'll narrow the gap or maybe balance it, but it won't take us over this year. What's really starting to show itself, and it's interesting, after I mentioned the articles last night to you, my wife had another one for me to read where everybody's been debating, are we in a recession? Are we going into a recession? About a month ago, I started seeing more and reading more about the American consumer has bad news for the U.S. economy. And I think what we're seeing with all the inflation pressures that we're seeing at the grocery store and everywhere else, people are now constricting on their disposable income, which is directly impacting sales tax and other things. The property tax, interestingly enough, is a good thing, but it's a bad thing in what it does to people, because that'll be another added restriction into disposable income. And so had they stay with what they're gonna have, that was about a $7.2 million increase in revenue for us. We're gonna end up modeling 50% of that, 7.4, so we're gonna model 3.7 million increase in that. And then when we do that, we typically in reappraisal years, this is part of our budget reset strategy, is we pull $1 million or so off of the ongoing funding and use it for one time, so when we're in a non-reappraisal year, we're not pinching ourselves so tight. Because historically what the city would do is you'd be flush, you would have no money, you'd be flush, you would have no money. So we're treating our reappraisal years in a different way so we can smooth that curve, so that we have the ability in off cycle years to actually make adjustments in the new organization. So at the end of the day, I think Jim said we're projecting that we may have $5.1 million. Last year was the first time I've seen this since I've been here. I said on our must-pay bills level 1, they tended to be between 700,000 and 900,000. I think I've seen as low as 6 once. Last year it was 1.9 million, and that was just the direct impact. Everything that we're feeling as individuals. Inflation we're feeling as an organization. So let's say we're somewhere, let's say it's 1.5. So if we're at 5.4 million, you take 1.5 off for must pay. I think we're going to have the same labor pressures. So if I think we have from the CBA automatic 4% increase with police and fire. So that's going to be close to $750,000, and then if you do that for the rest of the organization in the general fund, so you're going to knock $1.5 million to $2 million potentially, and so it doesn't leave a lot for us to deal with. I wanted to explain that so when you start seeing decisions we're making, there's at least a framework of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. The other advantage of maybe going now with the ballot initiative is that if some of these pass, so let's take the library for example, where we're putting in the ongoing operational cost and the preferred level of service. What that actually does for the rest of the departments in the general fund is it reduces one more layer of competition. And so that's part of this, what we're doing right now. And when we talked about on the rec center and the Y, and the Y goes, we save $1.1 million on ongoing expenses. We may reduce the tax increase by $500,000, let's say, and take it from there, but then take the other $500,000 or $600,000 and drop it in to offset some of the other operational issues we're dealing with. So these things are inherently tied to each other. I said a lot, so.
There's one more thing you should say, Harold, which is what you ended up with the council on, about this is a year of finishing things.
Yeah, so that was the other thing. So what really happened is, and I'll take parks for example, I hear, well, we're 20 years behind on building parks, and that's correct. What I've said to the council is, I can't explain what happened in the first 10 years. Don't know, wasn't here. What I can tell you what happened in the 10 years that I've been here is we had to completely reposition our staff into flood recovery, which if you're 10 years behind, the next thing you know, you're 15 years behind. But technically, we're still in flood recovery. And in a short period of time, at some point this year, you may not want to travel down Boston across the bridge because it's either going to be closed in one lane or 2 lanes. And then we're going to have the Army Corps and Isaac Walton. So the flood really kind of shook the system. But even in that, we did really well in the discipline in terms of the projects and flood recovery, but we have time constraints. What I'm seeing holistically, though, is we're not great at finishing things. So what I did this year, and I started it last year in the budget when we were looking at CIP going, can you finish it this year? Can you finish it this year? Yeah. I've seen the rollovers. I was already seeing this anyway. So in the CIP process, what we're saying is, don't put anything new if you can't finish what you started. So this will also be a reset year of finishing things. So then that way, as we're putting new things in, we can actually spend the money and get it done. Because that in its own right is creating issues because inflation's killing us. And to give you a sense of the inflation impact, I had a $4 million cost overrun on Coffin Street project, which is critical to our broader transportation system. I have got a $4 million overrun on the Boston Avenue Bridge, which up until this point, everything's come in under budget, and that was moving on time, so that's inflation. We're $1 million short on First and Main Transit Station, which is again incredibly important to our broader transportation system. What else did I have in that? $33 million short on Nelson Flanders. Again, that's not a timing issue. That's just the market getting away from us on concrete, steel, electrical components, everything else. And so we're managing that. We have managed Boston. I think we've got Kaufman under control. We're going to bridge that on 2 years. We've got to figure $1 million for First and Main. So this is also a year of finishing so that we can really create a blank slate as we're moving forward.
Can I ask a question about finishing things? So the Friends have picked up paying for 2 staff positions since 2017. Part of one of our resource specialists and part of the marketing specialists. And the Friends, Ronnie can fill in more if you want more details, have said quite clearly that their thought was they were helping start that position and that the city would pick up the pay and finish it at some point, and that hasn't happened, and they're getting grumpy about it. What is the thought there about starting and finishing paying for positions?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question because if you use the money to pay for half of that, or whatever it is, then that's money that's basically keeping your staff level at a baseline. It doesn't really shift the needle at all. And so I'm not sure what the conversations with Friends and on that issue. I think in the budget we said we can't fund it, and so then the option was Friends. And I don't know that we ever said absolutely.
No, we didn't.
That we would cover it, and so that's an example of expanding and doing some things, and we're moving here. So
Unfunded.
yeah.
And I think it has become a different philosophy with Friends because historically, Michelle always had a list of things she asked for and was always very clear that if the city can't pay for that, the Friends will. And it appears that way of doing things is
Right.
changing a little bit.
I think that Rob has gotten a little bit of pushback from the Friends. So that's something that we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point, you know, the operating model is this, probably what's changed.
Yeah.
They don't want to do that, but that's not how it's created, and so then
I talked to Linda Fetterman a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the whole situation very well, but I agree she's getting pretty grumpy about it. I don't know what the future holds exactly.
Well, I think what the question I have is really when you're talking about expanding services versus core services, and like a resource specialist, that's not expanding programming services. That's just trying to meet the needs of 1,424 people who walked in the door last year for resource assistance. And it's a core need, it's a permanent core need, it's a growing and permanent
Right.
core need. So like, what is the plan to address that?
Well, and I haven't dug into, I mean, this is what Christina and Jeff and Ronnie have to do, but, you know, I will tell you, when I look at that and I go into departments, even in public safety, you know, an example that I often hear is, well, it's a core service to provide all of fire services. Not necessarily. Core service is the immediate fire response. The concept of the tactical rescue unit or this or that, that's not necessarily core. And that's an extreme example, but in other operating budgets, I think we also have to look at the 180 things we do and say, what's core in this? And, you know, have to, need to, want to. That's sort of my mantra. What do we have to do? What do we need to do? And what do we want to do? And I think organizationally, we have to start looking at the wants and maybe start retracting a little bit on the wants to make sure we're getting the have tos and the need tos done. Because I think that's part of that lack of discipline is there, and I run into this all the time. People tell me I'm too busy, I'm too busy, I'm too busy. Council has given me a green light to stop the wants. I've given people a green light to stop the wants. And every time I ask the question, what are we gonna stop doing? It's crickets. And it's a lot of times I would argue because the wants are what staff wanna do, not necessarily what we have to do or need to do. And so I think that's gotta be part of the process too, to try to figure some of this out.
You know what I hear you saying, I think I understand most of what you're saying, most of it. But it seems like what I'm hearing is gonna be tough, you know, to fund a lot of different kinds of positions and resources, and whatever. It's gonna be tough to fund things. And it seems like you're saying that we have to evaluate our core services, you know, get back to the essential services, whatever the function is and whatever the office is. And that's what you're telling us. And any growth for a while can be pretty limited. You're not saying that we can't submit the request.
No, anybody
Oh,
can,
yeah.
they can submit anything they want.
Let me ask this though, what do you want from us? You know, if we have another discussion like this, what do you want from us as far as our programs?
Well, I think it's that question of, what do we have to do? I mean, everything Brady just said, I think we have to do, and I think it's going to be more pertinent as we continue in the future. And I'll explain why. The demographer, to your point of, we can't afford tax, and I'm talking our older adult population. We can't afford the tax increases, but we can't afford to downsize. You're entirely correct. I bought a house much later than most of you probably, because I haven't been here that long. And I had to buy it at the front end of this madness that's occurring. My kids are now going to college. I've got a big house that I don't need. We have to clean it. And my wife and I started talking about, well, how do we downsize? And then we started looking. To get a smaller house will cost significantly more than I paid for mine, and I would get upside down from an equity perspective. So it was kind of like, oh crap, we can't downsize. Now, what the demographer is showing us is that is a statewide problem. And that's also contributing to the housing crisis, because there's a normal, and in healthy housing markets, you have a normal attrition to where people like myself or people like you who said we want to downsize, you'll downsize, you'll dump houses on the market that then is picked up by the next generation moving in. That's actually part of our problem. And I say all of this because I think the demand for that hardcore social service assistance is only going to get worse because of that very issue. And then that's starting to spin itself off into issues in the Gen X group and now the millennials, because I think everybody thought they were gonna not wanna move to suburbia and live in houses, but what we're finding is they do. And COVID was a big trigger in that, and so now they're starting to get into the market. Gen X is still, we're not at the peak of our housing buying potential. We're close, but when you add those two and then the stagnant piece here, that's why we're $40,000-$50,000 a year short in Colorado. Units short in Colorado, but then that's also telling me that piece of what you all have to do is going to be more and more and more important, especially for those individuals that are now in the retirement stage of life that didn't necessarily have the pensions in place to account for everything that we're seeing. And I just think it's going to get worse. And so that, to me, that's a have to. I mean, we have to get very clear-eyed on this. What's a need to, what's a want to, as we're looking at what we do operationally to ensure that we're supporting those that are most in need. Now, another solution to this is something that Jeff does. If there are things that are want tos that people with means would be interested in participating in, Tom Roniotis and I were talking about this. So a lot of my friends that I started with here, they're all retiring. Dale and I talked about this, is I think there's also a group in that 55 to 65 range that may not naturally be inclined to utilize senior center services. But is there a market for that 55 to 65-year-old group to where you can do some fee-based services that helps facilitate things, that actually brings in revenue, that allows us to do some things? So you cover your operating expense with the fees, but then you maybe charge enough more to start bringing in a revenue model. And that helps offset helping those that are most in need of the core services that need to be supported with tax funds. So I think there's creative ways to approach it.
You know, that was going to be one of my questions. I call it an enterprise fund. Do you have enterprise funds?
I've got like 50 enterprise funds.
We do not want to be an enterprise fund.
Well, no, but it's the enterprise fund model where you take the same fee-based component, but you use it as revenue to drop in here. You don't want to be an enterprise fund by our definition, but you can take the same concept.
Can we talk about a current problem we see happening with our revenue on the recreation side?
Let me say one thing first. Ronnie and I have had that exact conversation about that 55 to 65-year-old group. And one of the challenges that senior services has is that they're closed on the weekends and they close at 5. Most of us that are in that 55 to 65 age group are still working those hours of the day that the senior center is open. For us to have the capacity to bring in those extra revenues, we would need the resources to be able to expand the hours.
Or figure out how we can partner with other groups to augment it. And so here's, if via senior services, you know, once our, I'm gonna tie it to golf now real quick.
All right.
So golf has a reach of like this. Senior services has a reach like this. If the golf and senior services were put together and you did this, and maybe you said, we want to work a beginning golf program for older adults. You figure out how you can split the revenue and minimize the staffing costs. Then not only are you benefiting this program, you're benefiting golf because you're bringing in different people. Not that that's the right answer, Jeff, but I think we have to get creative in how we're looking at this and how we work collectively as an organization to benefit the whole.
Yeah, and my thought that recreation and senior services is a better fit because we do a lot of similar types of things in the recreation world. And maybe between Ronnie and Ben, they could come up with that extra programming and cost share the revenue share, what's brought in. Like that.
You know, that, another question that I think comes into this, because there are the 61 to 70 demographic are people like me who don't know how to not work and found themselves retired. So what would the rules be in terms of liability and all of that? In terms of a ratio of people staffing an open building, what percentage can be volunteers versus what percentage have to be absolutely employees?
I don't think there's a magic answer to that. I think we would always need one full-time staff member there. We are, part of what we dealt with in the budget last year was, we created a volunteer coordinator. And so HR is now starting to aggregate a lot of that, and part of the reason was we had so many people doing it that we were stepping on our own toes. And so I think through that volunteer coordinator position, we could do that and get very specific. I know Karen Rademacher was volunteering with you all on the technical side.
She's a highly skilled human being.
Right, I know Dell
Smarter than her
was,
husband.
yeah, don't tell him I said that. So that's definitely a solution, and I think that brings the community together to how to, not only as an organization, how do we solve problems, but how do we solve problems as a community?
I have a question about hours, because we do need to expand hours, but there's the staffing and all of that that goes along with it. But has anyone considered changing hours or alternating hours? Or have we looked at what are the peak hours of utilization in the senior center? And are there days that are more active than other days? And is there a way to have, 10 to 6 or 11 to 7, 1 or 2 days a week to accommodate people that need those after work hours without necessarily having to expand staff?
That's actually
Look
great.
a little later.
That's actually a great point, and we're doing that in different places. One of the things I was going to suggest is we're really moving more into data-informed decision-making. And so we've integrated some groups within multiple departments, and we call it, what's this group called now? Strategic integration. So we have a lot of data folks. And one of the things I was going to say, again, I think this is something as a city we haven't really been great at, is we kind of do what we're doing and we keep doing it. And a lot of times when I'm in conversations, the answer is, well, we've always done it this way. I think it would be good to do some surveying and really see, I think in terms of capacity, we can figure that out internally. But then, if you're looking at targeting a certain demographic to help generate revenue, to go, I would survey that group, 55 to 65-year-olds, and go, what would you like to see? What would you like us to do? Because a lot of times we think we know what people want us to do, and in reality, that's not what they want us to do. And so I would maybe tap Becky to see how we could do some surveying there. Because it gets to that point. How are you opening at optimal hours? And if you were to cut it from, what time do you all open? 8?
7:45.
So, yeah, so, you can do it where we open at 10 and we close at 7, or we open at 10 and close at 5 and have hours on Saturday. You can do it where you open at 8, but you don't bring your full staffing contingent at 8. And so you bring some in at 8, you bring some in at this time, and then you elongate or you move. There's about 1,000 ways to deal with this. The other thing that I think we can start actively talking about is if you wanted to expand some of these things on the housing authority side, we have a lot of age-restricted units. There may be ways that we can partner there, and maybe it doesn't have to be at the senior center. Maybe it could be at Aspen Meadows Apartments, or maybe Spring Creek. Start expanding scope geographically as well, utilizing facilities that we already have in play. Staffing is going to be an issue, but
I think making the message clear that if and when hours are shifted, this is why. And so,
but do it with data.
Do it with data, yeah, don't do it
with
like, next week, we're gonna open at 10, but, really be thoughtful about the data.
Because it's easy to go to folks and say, well, here's what you wanted. We even do trash collection, they work 4 days a week. If you can figure trash out, you can almost figure out anything. Because that's all, I'm telling you, trash is,
It's really
people
complicated.
I ask people, what's the most important service the city provides? And everybody at Oakley says, trash service.
Yeah.
Look at what's happened in the Northeast when the sanitation workers are going on strike.
Yeah.
Shuts the city down.
Except for the rats.
Yeah. So I think that's a good suggestion, and I'm open to all of that. That's the one thing I think they can all say is, I'm not afraid of risk, and I'm not afraid of being creative to find solutions. And you know what? What if we test one out, it doesn't work? What do we lose? Nothing. We just go back. That's how you make improvements. And I think that's a mindset shift that I'm still struggling with 10 years later. The first time I came in and I talked to everyone, I said, I'm not afraid of risk and I'm not afraid of mistakes. You make mistakes to make improvements. And I'll never obliterate anyone for a mistake unless it's what I call you're just sitting on your backside not trying to improve, and it's a crazy mistake. Other than that, I'm pretty tolerant. It's literally taking us 10 years to get more and more adoption of that, because I think people are inherently afraid of risk. But I think we have to bring that component in from the private sector into what we do as government, because otherwise, 20 years from now, we're going to be looking up going, well, we're doing it because we're doing it. And government needs to shift.
Question, in reference to the ballot issue, is that going to take an increase in personnel? And where is that going to be?
It's factored into it.
It is factored into
It is
that.
factored into it, which that is the potential where it actually, I think, creates capacity in other places. Because Jeff can then get creative with how he's staffing, so then maybe we're not having to have rent come in all the time for positions, and then if the library has this funding source, sending it on a trajectory that they don't come in. So now all of a sudden we're restricting the amount of departments coming in needing space or needing staff. So yeah, we were.
Sorry.
Oh, I thought the great. So no, that is why we built that in, because we were not going to, those who failed to learn from history's mistakes are doomed to repeat them. That's actually what started part of this problem too on the park side. I just said this story. They were just building parks. They were never adding the staff to maintain them. And they actually were cutting staff. And so when we came in, it's like, oh no. So we went to the council and said, we can't build any more parks until we get the staff we need to maintain them. Or you may remember that conversation, because I think you were in a couple of those meetings for something else. And so we now finally caught up to where we now can build parks based on the staffing. But yeah, we weren't going to do that again.
I think the other thing that we built into the ballot is the capital replacement as well. City historically has not done a good job of preparing to maintain the facilities that we have, and that is a built-in component with the ballot issue. So if we build a new rec center, there's money there to help keep it, all of the HVAC units and so on, operational.
Yeah, we spent, what was the city hall, 5 million, what's the library, 2, 3?
Yeah. That's
8, and then another 2 or 3 in our public safety building, so around 10 million or somewhere in there. And you all cannot tell what we did. Because the foundations were failing, the wall structures were failing, and so, again, those who failed to learn from history mistakes are doomed to repeat it. That's why we built it in, because we had facilities that were at end of life, and that was a bond initiative that everyone voted on to rehab all these facilities, and it was because we never invested in them over time. And so literally 40, 50 years later, we were about to get red tagged on the Civic Center because the foundation was failing. Same thing in the library. And we're now seeing the same thing in our public safety building. So that's another thing that we've had to build into our budget, is really a really good ongoing maintenance program and being disciplined. Because what that does is that took $10 million away from us that we could have potentially said, we're gonna add a library annex for like 5 or 10 million. We're gonna add on to the senior center. We're gonna, do that. I mean, it's just money that basically, if you go in our building, the only thing that you'll see that's different is a wall around the building, and that was put in because we needed to reduce the weight limit on it. All the post-tension slab, and it started breaking. And, but yeah, 10 million just gone.
Let me ask you, the volunteer coordinator specialist, whatever you said it was, have you found that to be cost effective? I mean, are we getting the volunteers?
Oh yeah,
Volunteers we got?
you can quantify the value in that. So the Marcia's question about volunteers here, David Bell does a really good job on tracking the hours and the work reduction on that. And if you all wanted to do it, I'd want to do the same thing, because we can quantify that.
We know we have it quantified. A third of our programs are run by volunteers.
Yeah.
A third of our programs are run by volunteers.
And so we can then take it into a dollar value to say that's equivalent to a third, probably 2 staff members. I mean, that's equivalent to about $150,000.
Okay.
Just why we throw y'all a party every year.
And then I have a question for Christina. How long does it take, are all positions have the same requirements as to how long you have to wait, how long you have to post, et cetera, et cetera? Because I guess I know of some positions that by the time it closes, you go with some of these people and they've been hired by somebody else.
We've actually shifted that.
You did?
So I think everybody should be posting their positions right now, open until filled.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
And we had to do that a couple of years because we were finding that. And it's like, stop. Do it open until filled.
Great. Glad to hear that.
So if you get a great candidate in day one, you better
That's
go
right.
after that great candidate in day one.
I agree.
Okay, so it's open public posting right away. Is that what you're saying? No internal posting?
There are some we do internal.
There are some internal.
Any other questions?
So what I'll tell you is I definitely heard what you said. I've been hearing it. If we had all the money in the world, I would go, here it is. We were kind of hoping we would have another good year. But definitely the things that you mentioned are things that have been brought to my attention. And, we'll definitely do our best to hit some of these needs if we can. Just know it's, my lens is always going to be have to, need to, want to. And you've obviously heard me say there's some have to's we've got to figure out fast. What we may want to think about is bridging it with the LHA too. So let's talk to Kendra, because if we can do an LHA city split.
Well, so we're going cross purposes there, because one of the things that we've talked about with the LHA at our monthly meetings with the support services team is that a lot of the problems they're running into in the buildings are because people aren't getting out of their building and going into the community. They're just sitting there all day stewing and
Agreed.
fighting at each other. So we are actually doing more get acquainted programs this summer with specific outreach to the housing authority to try to get people to leave the building and come to us.
If I can get them as part of it, and I can, let's say, we fund one and they fund one, but we design it not with the tax credit limitation, maybe we can create two. So 50% funding on two, 50% on the other. 50% from the housing authority.
Yeah, we could create two whats?
Either
Are you talking about programming?
programming.
Oh, sorry, you had mentioned programming a while ago, and I was
No,
like,
no, no, this is not programming, this is,
The resource staff.
the resource specialist or account, I mean, we did it kind of with yours, but I think there's a way we can maybe get that, but we're straight there too, but maybe one for sure.
But there you go, Brandy, we're talking about, using the building on the weekend would be a plus. If you get one staff member, to open that once a month, then you can set up volunteer programs to bring those people in, right? It gets the people in the housing authority places into a different place.
And it may not be a resource, I mean,
The added resource where we really have to is the recs.
it may be a rec program, it may be a combination of it, where it's a program
Like,
position that develops.
Yeah.
I don't think we have it. You've got an idea?
See there, David, if you get half a person out of this, it was all worth it.
Yeah.
This-
That's why I was asking him to come next month, the other half.
Well, no, part of what I'm dealing with is to Brandy's point, we're not getting people out of there. We don't have enough programs there. Maybe part of it is we have to bring people there to then get people to go somewhere else. And if we could have maybe some kind of coordinator program that assists bridging, but also filling gaps.
That would be equivalent to like community programs coordinators. person.
Yeah, I mean, we do it in other divisions, we don't do it here.
So maybe looking at like,
Is that envision, so you're envisioning a 50-50 split?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just asking out loud, would that allow us to be intentional in focusing on the Spanish program piece? That board collectively is very interested in focusing on that piece, right, the programs, bilingual program. My side, I mean, it allows us to put attention towards it. I don't know if it's collectively what you were envisioning.
Well, but so if you bring the dollars in, right, you can shift dollars and then do what you're wanting to here, but then shifting and then still accomplishing. We did that with Sarah already, actually. That's what we did with Sarah. So we're funding Sarah's position to bring her more active in, not her position, a lower level, to bring her more engaged within the housing authority, but also connecting that to crime-free multifamily and the other pieces. So that's what I'm thinking about is like a Sarah model, but a Sarah model that helps fill some gaps.
Right. So I think that could bring in new patrons, right, and your additional revenue. I don't know if that's enough to start having discussions from the other half. I think where that piece would come from is our extended travel.
But we have bilingual issues at the housing authority too, because I know we're using.
Valerie, our new resource specialist.
No. She's gone to some of the meetings I've had translating.
Oh.
Melissa? Veronica?
Veronica. think she's done that, so, I mean, there's a bilingual need at the housing authority too. I think it's Veronica, no, not Veronica. I'll figure it out, but somebody from the senior group has been in housing authority meetings and our age restricted units that has helped interpret.
I would think Veronica had a whole lot of time to do.
Well, you make time when your city manager asks you to.
I didn't ask him to do it. I didn't ask him to do it. That was the thing. I didn't ask him to do it. I just walked in and they were there.
That's great.
So,
There are people who do that sort of thing.
yeah, and that's why I was curious because we have our tier 3 interpreters, which we need to rotate, which I was curious as to why. It may have been a joint client.
Or maybe
That,
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
This is just a comment that appreciate all you being here today. I got a lot, but I don't know how much I was able to absorb it, but it's definitely interesting.
yeah.
It's been invaluable.
That's right.
So that's kind of why I wanted to do it. I told these two, I said, we need to, I don't want you all to be in a position where, as a board, you say something and then I have to come in and go, no, that's not it, or I want you to understand our process, and I probably need to do this with every board.
Yeah.
To understand our decision-making process and why we're doing it. And the thing I leave everyone with is it's not that we don't want to do it.
And I understand that. It's been helpful because it's restructured my thinking quite a bit.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, I'm going from 20 years ago. Except it doesn't work anymore. So. Any other comments?
Tell you, we're pretty fortunate city when you look at what's going on in some of these other cities.
Yeah.
Our law enforcement, fire department, even the trash department, the trash folks. I mean, I am out there once in a while, I go by, and I mean, they do a good job of doing what they have to do. Of course, the center. So thank you for what you're doing to be examples and leaders for our city.
Thanks. That's actually part of what inhibits us with grants too. Because we're so far ahead of so many cities. There's a lot of grants that we don't even qualify for. So the grants we tend to qualify for are those innovative grants that are on the cutting edge. And a lot of the base level grants that we're seeing out there, it's, you have to have this condition and we don't have that condition.
or there are grants that are meant to get your community to collaborate around a specific issue. And we're just so far surpassed that
You'd rather have it that way. That's
Those
a
are
plus.
yeah.
If we were going to apply for a grant, realistically, if there was something, when that grant expired, do we typically have to pick up the funding ourselves?
Yeah, that's something we're pretty careful about because most of this was in the police world where you saw the police grants for police officers. We didn't do a lot of that because they require you to then pick it up, which takes away your ability to really look at priorities down the road because now you have to fund it.
Right. And that's part of what we bring forward to council when we bring grants that, if they're state or federal grants, that's part of what we report on to council. What's the financial investment that the city makes? Is there a match, and are we obligated to continue this funding after the grant expires? And so, council asks us about that.
That's actually something I think I think there's a lot of people don't understand like the public safety sales tax. Because I've had questions recently about, well, why don't you put more police expenses over there? The way it was voted on doesn't allow us to do that. The public safety sales tax can only be used for new or improved. So all the dollars that are raised from that either has to go to like new officers, new programs. I can't use it to fund something that existed prior to the adoption of that public safety sales tax, which creates a big issue for us from a budget perspective, because then when you inevitably go into those bad financial periods, it creates an issue for that tax, and it creates an issue for us in that we're having to manage on a smaller pool, because that revenue doesn't come in, which is in this other tax, what we're trying to use to figure out how to word it to say the ongoing piece is for this, but in the event of an economic downturn, we can balance the entire rec system, for example, versus having, when you balkanize your tax base, you create some really significant challenges in economic downturns, because you just start pressing the impact on a smaller and smaller group of departments.
It is new.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No,
Thank you.
So very good. Thank you so much.
Before we break up, I do need 2 volunteers to help Ronnie and I do board interviews. Is
I'll go
anybody-
ahead and try to,
Okay.
I'll try to be.
I can, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Harold.
I think,
I'm away for June, so it may not be.
Okay.